Okay, Samuel says he believes he is already free. Now that's very interesting. That's a very important basic question, because if you already consider yourself free, then why study the philosophy of freedom?
Dancing fearless.
The first chapter in the book addresses that. That's the first thing taken up in the philosophy of freedom is, are you free or am I free? So it covers, throughout that chapter, it covers many views, many views of freedom. And then it presents the opposing view that says that, well, this freedom actually is an illusion. Something you can do on the chapter 1, conscious human action, is to go through it and find the view of freedom that you relate to, because it presents, several different views as far as what it means to be people's belief in freedom. And you can likely find your belief in freedom, or maybe you believe that you're free in all the kinds of freedom described, and then look at the opposing view that questions that freedom, and basically calls that freedom an illusion, because it's very recognized thing that most freedom is an illusion, because we're not really aware of the strings that are controlling us. But so that's what really chapter 1's all about. You can go through it and then look at the arguments against freedom and then question your freedom. Another thing about freedom is that it's really talking about freedom of knowing. That's what the book is really about, what freedom means, free knowing. So that's what the first 7 chapters go over, is what it means to free your perception, what it means to free your conception, so that you can know the world. So I don't know if you consider that your knowing is free, would be the question you have to ask yourself. Victor asks, do you leave the body during sleep? That sounds more like, well, I wouldn't have any idea about that. Victor asks, since you are not spiritual inclined, how did you meet Steiner? Well, actually, my first introduction was, I think, knowledge of higher worlds, which I guess I was more spiritual inclined, 30 years ago. And then I came across biodynamic gardening, and which I used at a little mini farm for a while, and also Waldorf education, because I was terrified of public schools. So I put my kids in, my 2 boys into Waldorf schools. I was involved in a kind of a New Age Christianity, and that kind of reached a point where it wasn't working anymore. So I had a midlife crisis, where I needed to find something else. And then I looked at Steiner, went out to Rudolf Steiner College to learn about that, and then found the philosophy of freedom. And then that set me off on a course for the second half of my life. So I guess I was spiritual inclined, and then moved more toward the science of freedom as I grew older. Nobody's really verified Steiner's perceptions into the spiritual worlds and be able to say, "Oh yeah, this did happen on Atlantis and all this stuff." Nobody's been able to verify it, because nobody's been able to reach the state that Steiner was in. So it's mainly faith based. But that's what's unique about the philosophy of freedom, is that you can verify everything that's in there by understanding the description and everything, then observing your own mind. It doesn't take exceptional ability to verify anything in the philosophy of freedom. All you have to do is observe your own thoughts, which involve the processes of cognition, such as thinking, perception, conception, forming ideas. These are things we do every day. Is it possible to be free having an uninspiring job? That's a great question. That really relates freedom to real life. It would be everybody's dream to think, gee, I want a job doing what I really love doing and what I really feel is real value to the world, to where I can really make my contribution. Love is really based on your ideals. I mean, are you fulfilling an ideal in that job? Like for myself, I mean, I was fulfilling an ideal of being able to support my family. So in that sense, I love my job. And I was also able to fulfill my ideal of studying the philosophy of freedom because I arranged my schedule to allow me to do that. Since I was self employed, I was able to control my hours more and when I worked. So my job did meet a lot of ideals, which I suppose is why I did it. Because what we really love is high ideals. I mean, that's what we find inspiring, and that's what we really love. When we love a person, it's because we see certain ideals in that person, things that we value. That's written about in chapter 1 in the Philosophy of Freedom near the end of the chapter. So if you can relate what you're doing to your ideals, then you can love whatever you're doing. If you are pursuing your highest ideals, I mean, you are free. Samuel says there's a big three: knowing, being, and doing. If you are free, you have to be free on all these levels. In fact, I'm just on that summary I'm working out on the philosophy of freedom. Those come up as topics. Free being, free knowing, and free doing are three of the chapter topics that come up. I mean, free doing shows up in chapter 1 and chapter 14. Knowing comes up, and free knowing comes up in most of the first part of the book, first 7 chapters. And free being comes up in chapter 8. It talks about freeing your personality by cognizing your feelings, which is basically understanding your feelings. Otherwise, your being can be controlled by your life of feeling, blind feelings. I mean, people try to base knowledge on their feelings, like how they feel about it, source of their knowledge, which leads to a lot of error. Steiner addresses that in chapter 8, The Factors of Life. And he also talks about ethical individualism, which is a free being.